If you've ever had a minor criticism completely derail your day, or spent hours replaying a comment someone made, or felt a wave of intense emotional pain from something as small as a short text reply, that experience has a name, and it's called rejection sensitive dysphoria. And it might be one of the most important things you learn about yourself. So today I'm going to break down what it is, what's actually driving it, and how I approach it with my patients. Welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Dan Sullivan. I'm a licensed naturopathic medical doctor, a certified functional medicine practitioner, and I also have ADHD myself. On this channel, I aim to educate and empower using evidence-based medicine and a root cause lens, looking beyond medication alone to better understand what's really driving ADHD symptoms. RSD is one of those things that doesn't get nearly enough attention in the ADHD conversation. Most people, and honestly a lot of clinicians, are focused on the attention piece, the executive function piece, and the productivity struggles. And those are real, but for a lot of people with ADHD, the emotional side of this condition is actually what causes the most day-to-day suffering. Now, one thing I want to mention up front is that RSD is not currently an official diagnosis in the DSM, which is the manual clinicians use to diagnose mental health conditions. But that doesn't mean it isn't real. It describes a pattern that clinicians working closely with ADHD patients see all the time. The lack of an official diagnostic code is part of the reason this gets overlooked, but the experience itself is very well recognized by those of us actually working in this space. What I see clinically is that many people with RSD have been carrying this for years without ever having a name for it. They've been told they're too sensitive, too emotional, or too reactive. Some of them have been diagnosed with anxiety or depression, or even borderline personality disorder, because the emotional intensity looks similar on the surface. But the underlying driver is different, and that matters when it comes to how you actually address it. One pattern I see fairly often is someone who comes in presenting primarily with anxiety. They're worried about what people think, they're constantly people-pleasing, they're exhausted from managing other people's reactions to them. And when we dig deeper, what's really underneath it is this intense fear of criticism and rejection that's been there since childhood. That's RSD. And once they understand that, something shifts. So let's start with what this actually is. The word dysphoria is important here, and it means intense emotional suffering. This isn't just feeling upset or disappointed. We're talking about a wave of emotional pain that can feel almost physical in how strong it is. And with RSD, that wave gets triggered by real or perceived rejection, criticism, or the sense that someone is disappointed in you. That word perceived is important because the brain doesn't always distinguish between actual rejection and the idea of rejection. Someone doesn't text you back for a few hours, and your nervous system reacts like you've been rejected even though nothing has actually happened. Your boss sends you a short email and suddenly you're convinced you're about to get fired. One of the most important things to understand about RSD is that it's episodic. It's triggered. It's not a constant baseline state the way depression or generalized anxiety can be. You can feel totally fine one moment, and then a single comment, a single look, or a single text can completely derail you for hours, sometimes even for days. That's actually one of the clues clinically that we're dealing with RSD and not something else. And the ways it shows up in everyday life are often things people don't even connect to RSD. It can look like explosive emotional reactions like anger, tears, or shutting down. It can look like intense people pleasing, where you're constantly scanning for any sign that someone might be upset with you. It can look like perfectionism that keeps you from ever finishing anything because if it's not perfect, it might be criticized. It can look like avoiding feedback altogether, or over-explaining and over-apologizing in conversations, or reading tone into every text message you get. Here's an example. I had a patient get a mildly critical email from their boss. Nothing harsh, just a note about something that needed to be changed. And they couldn't function for the rest of the afternoon. They spent hours replaying it in their head, drafting and redrafting response, and basically lost the entire day to it. And here's the thing I really want you to take away from this. If you've been dealing with this your whole life and wondering what's wrong with you, there's a real and specific reason the ADHD brain reacts the way it does. So let's talk about why. A lot of it comes down to dopamine and norepinephrine, two of the key neurotransmitters involved in ADHD. These are the chemicals that help to regulate attention, motivation, and executive function, but they also play a huge role in emotional regulation and how the brain processes emotional pain. So when those pathways are already dysregulated, which is the case in ADHD, the emotional side of things is going to be affected as well. The other piece of this is that the ADHD brain tends to have a more reactive threat detection system, especially especially when it comes to social and emotional threats. And part of the reason for that is that the ADHD nervous system often sits closer to a baseline of activation, meaning the stress response fires more easily and with less provocation than it would in a neurotypical brain. There's also a growing body of neuroimaging research showing that the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that processes emotional threats, tends to be more reactive in people with ADHD, especially in those who struggle with emotional dysregulation. And on top of that, the connections between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's supposed to help you regulate that emotional response, tends to be less coordinated. So the alarm bell rings louder and the part of your brain that's supposed to calm it down isn't quite doing its job. That's why the reaction feels so intense and so immediate. You're not choosing to overreact, your system is genuinely responding to it as a threat. What all this means in practical terms is that small triggers can produce very large responses. It's kind of like having a Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes. The emotional intensity comes on fast and powerful, but the system that's supposed to slow it down and bring you back to baseline isn't able to keep up. So everything feels more intense and it's much harder to come back down once you're activated. Now here's why all this matters for how we actually approach it. If your underlying physiology is already dysregulated in some way, whether that's blood sugar swings throughout the day, poor sleep, could be nutrient deficiencies, hormonal imbalances, or chronic inflammation, your nervous system is already running in a more stressed, more reactive state. And in that state, RSD is going to be significantly amplified. Everything is going to feel more intense because your body doesn't have the resources to regulate the way it needs to. And this is exactly why in my clinical work, I typically don't start with the psychology piece. I start with the physiology, which is what I want to get into next. So in my clinical practice, I use what I call a bottom-up approach before I move to what I call a top-down approach. And I want to walk you through what that actually means because I think it's one of the most important things to understand if you're dealing with RSD or really any ADHD symptom. The bottom-up approach is all about addressing the physiology first. So before we get into any of the mindset work or the therapy or the cognitive tools, I want to know what's happening in your body. I want to know how your blood sugar is behaving throughout the day. I want to know how you're sleeping. I want to look at key nutrients that are involved in neurotransmitter production and emotional regulation, things like magnesium, zinc, iron, B vitamins, and omega-3s. I want to look at your hormones, including thyroid, sex hormones, and cortisol. I want to address gut health and inflammation because all of these things directly influence how your nervous system is functioning on a moment-to-moment basis. And when we address these things, when we stabilize blood sugar, improve sleep, correct nutrient deficiencies, balance hormones, and reduce inflammation, what tends to happen is that dopamine signaling improves, the nervous system calms down, and a lot of ADHD symptoms, including RSD, become significantly more manageable. I've had patients who came in struggling deeply with emotional reactivity, and after a few months of targeted physiological support, they tell me that things that used to completely wreck them now feel like minor annoyances. They're obviously not immune to criticism, but their system is actually able to process it and move on. And if this has been helpful so far, take a second to like the video. This helps YouTube to show it to more people who may really benefit. Once that physiological foundation is more stable, that's where the top-down approaches really start to land. And by top-down, I mean psychology-based tools. This includes things like cognitive reframing, different therapy modalities, and just the simple act of naming RSD or having language for what you've been experiencing. That alone is therapeutic for a lot of people. So many of my patients have told me that just understanding what's happening in their brain was a huge relief because for the first time, they had an explanation that actually made sense. Here's the key insight I want you to walk away with. If you try to do the top-down work first and your physiology is deeply dysregulated, those tools very often don't stick. You'll read the books, you'll try the techniques, you'll do the therapy, and you'll feel frustrated because nothing seems to actually work. And then you end up thinking something's wrong with you when really your body just doesn't have the foundation it needs for those tools to be effective. Get the physiology right first and everything else starts to work the way it's supposed to. All right, so let's get practical. When you're in the middle of an RSD episode, when that wave of emotional pain is already hit, what can you actually do in the moment? Here are a few tools that I recommend to patients and I use myself. The first one is what's often called name it to tame it, saying either out loud or to yourself, this is my RSD. That act of naming it creates a small amount of distance between you and the emotion, which starts to engage the part of your brain that can help you regulate it. It sounds simple, but it's genuinely powerful. The The second is what I call the 24-hour rule. When RSD hits, your perception of the situation is distorted. You're not seeing things clearly in that moment. Your nervous system is in a threat response and your brain is likely catastrophizing. So the best thing you can do is give yourself some time before responding to whatever triggered you, whether that's a text, an email, or a conversation. Ideally, wait 24 hours, but even just a few hours can make a huge difference. Come back to it when your system has had time to settle. I can't tell you how many times I've seen patients and myself avoid making a huge mess by just waiting before responding. The third is a question I want you to memorize. When you're spiraling, ask yourself, is this a fact or is this a feeling? Start to question your own assumptions, because with RSD, what feels like a certainty, the absolute conviction that someone is mad at you or that you're about to get fired is almost always an interpretation, not a confirmed fact. Challenging those assumptions in the moment is one of the most effective cognitive tools you have. The fourth tool is getting the experience out of your head. One way to do this is to check in with a trusted person, someone who knows you, who has a calm perspective, and who can reality check what you're feeling. RSD lies, and an outside perspective can pull you out of the spiral very quickly. Another version of this that I really like is pulling out your phone and sending yourself a voice memo, just brain dumping everything you're thinking and feeling. The simple act of getting it out of your head and into words, even if no one else ever hears it, creates distance between you and the emotion. And now here's a tool that I think is genuinely game-changing, and it's something that wasn't available even a few years ago. Once you've done that voice memo brain dump, you can actually take the transcript and paste it into ChatGPT or Claude and ask the AI to respond to you as a trusted friend or as a therapist, or even as a wise mentor. And honestly, the perspective you can get back is often remarkably helpful. It can reality check your spiral, help you to see the situation more clearly, and suggest ways to think about it that you wouldn't have come up with on your own. It's essentially like having access to an outside perspective on demand, 24/7 for free. For those moments when RSD hits at 11 p.m. and you don't have anyone to call, this is a really powerful tool. Obviously, it's not a replacement for real therapy or real human connection, but as an in-the-moment tool for navigating an RSD spiral, it's one of the most useful things I've recommended to patients in recent years. The fifth category is somatic, or working with the body. A really fast tool is something called the physiological sigh, which is 2 quick inhales through the nose followed by a long exhale through the mouth. It's one of the fastest, most research-backed ways to downregulate your nervous system in real time. Another option is cold water on your face, which activates the body's calming reflexes and drops your heart rate. Both of these take seconds and can really help take the edge off when you're activated. And the last one is movement. Think about it this way. When a duck has a conflict with another duck, you'll often see it flap its wings aggressively right after the altercation is over. It's literally discharging the energy and stress chemicals that built up during the confrontation. Animals in the wild do this naturally. They move to burn off the stress response so it doesn't stay stuck in the body. We're no different. When RSD hits, your body has just dumped a bunch of stress hormones and catecholamines into your system, and those chemicals need somewhere to go. Whether it's going for a walk, shaking your body out, or doing some jumping jacks, movement literally helps metabolize and discharge those chemicals. And you'll feel the intensity come down much faster than if you just sit with it. And I want to be clear, these tools work best when your underlying physiology is supported. If your system is already running on empty, these tools are going to be far less effective. But they're still worth having in your toolkit because RSD doesn't wait for you to have your blood work optimized. It's going to hit regardless, and these tools can help you navigate it when it does. Here's what I really want you to take away from all this. If you spent your life thinking you're just too sensitive or too emotional or too reactive, I want you to start seeing it differently. What you're dealing with has a name, and it has a clear explanation rooted in how the ADHD brain is wired around dopamine, norepinephrine, and emotional threat processing. And the way I approach it with my patients is to start from the bottom up, addressing the physiological foundation first, because when your body is supported, your nervous system has the capacity to regulate the way it's supposed to. Once that foundation is in place, the top-down tools like the cognitive work, the therapy, the in-the-moment strategies that we just talked about start to actually work the way they're meant to. So if you want to work with me one-on-one to address what's actually driving your ADHD symptoms and your RSD at the root, I'd love to help. You can find the link to book a discovery call in the description below. And one of the most important pieces of the bottom-up approach is diet, so I'd recommend watching this video next.